Italian department that works on many Spanish, early modern, and medieval topics, so a good person to know if you're interested in such things. It's a real pleasure to have Stefania here tonight. She's a professor of early modern history at the Scuola Normale Superiore di Pisa, which she also did her PhD. Her work focuses, as you probably already know, on the cultural and religious history of late medieval and early modern Spain. Her first book, Il Vangelo da Spada, in 2003, was a study of the Inquisition of Castile. And her second book, called Una Heresia Española, which exists in Martial Pon's Spanish translation, was a study of the conversos and alumbrados and the various intersections and connections among them. She's published a collection of primary sources on Inquisition, which is probably a useful teaching tool for Christian Italian, as well as many other articles on urban history, on gender, on Jesuits, an article a book chapter that I recently read on Roman states about the Moriscos. So she really has wide-ranging interests. She's currently a fellow at the Davis Center at Princeton, which is part of the way she's here today. But she's also held fellowships at the ITATI, the Harvard Center for Italian Renaissance Studies, the ITATI Center, the Complutense, the Universidad Complutense de Madrid, Wisconsin-Madison, the Newberry Library, and a long list of other places. So maybe I'll just turn it over to Stefania, who's going to talk about Spain, Italy, and the culture of skepticism. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Seth, and thank you, Matteo, for inviting me here, and thank you for coming. I have to say first that I skipped in my title, Diego Hurtado de Mendoza, who is the person that I really focus on, but you will see during the video. So I also hope you can read from there, but España las armas, Italia la pluma. On the one side, a rough and warlike Spain, and on the other, a languid post-Renaissance Italy. And if we have a glance at the title of the numerous papers on the relations between Italy and Spain, or on the effect of the Spanish presence in Italy under Charles V and Philip II, a number much increased by the recent centenary celebration that in this last decade had inundated Italian and Spanish historiography and cultural studies, it's sufficient to confirm that when all is said and done, we have not moved far from the intriguing simplification pronounced by the Grand Capitan González de Córdoba, España las armas, Italia la pluma, which Paolo Giovio later developed in his book. Italy does remain the homeland of culture, literature, philosophy, of a Renaissance whose brilliance was perhaps clouded, but which still possessed a certain measure of a cultural hegemony, and Spain was the great rising empire kept in an inequivocal relationship of cultural subjection, which politically and militarily was reversed. It was thus a case of politics and military power versus culture, but at the same time that of an empire that was expanding and gaining legitimacy in the shadow of the papacy. So the Catholic Church and Rome thus became the common factor that was bringing Italy and Spain close together. Of course, what I'm saying is it's a simplification of the simplification, abrupt and tough, like all the simplification, but that particular formula appeared to continue to have remained valid from Benedetto Croce until Thomas Dandlet's latest depiction of the relationship between Italy and Spain. Such an interpretation obviously conceals the various weighty national legends that are closely linked to the identities of the two countries had constructed for himself. So anti-Spanishness on one hand, and the Black Legend on the other. Italy for a very, very long time, in Italy for a very, very long time, Spanish rule had been associated with a protracted period of political and cultural decadence, to the close, suffocating mentality of the Counter-Reformation, and the failure to reproduce the brilliance of the Golden Age and the Renaissance. And Spanish influence in Italy was one that brought narrowness of mind, moral degradation, imbued intellectual energy and freedom, and put a final end to the days of Italy's cultural and intellectual superiority to the rest of Europe. So that as a consequence, Italy was ignominiously relegated to a shamefully low level in European culture and intellectual history. Opposite this, of course, we are talking about stereotype and the topic that are still quite used in Spanish and Italian historiography. Opposite this, there was the black legend of Spain that was closed to the outside world, backward, firmly committed to its all-out defense of Catholicism, and well represented by the darkest of all its institutions, the Spanish Inquisition. And on one side, there was this impression of a southern Catholic empire that was losing its brilliance, destined to forgo its political and cultural supremacy, while the part of Europe that had gone through the Reformation was launched on enterprises of great account. So an empire is suffocated by the extreme conformism of the Catholic Church and of the Inquisition. So while France and England and Holland were on their way to opening up to the modern world, with a rich blossoming of intellectual and philosophers, Spain and Italy's deadly embrace would, in the name of obscurantist Catholicism, banish the South forever from the mainstream of European intellectual history. Thus, on the one side, we have Montaigne, Charon, Descartes, Spinoza, and Locke laying the foundation of a secular culture that made doubt and relativism the key to a new and modern culture that could eventually open its door to the great age of enlightenment, and on the other, there are two hypotheses that I would like to draw to your attention, and I will do so by considering the singular life and experience of the Spanish ambassador to Italy, the celebrated art collector, bibliophilist, and humanist Diego Hurtado de Mendoza. The first hypothesis is that the history of the political, cultural, and religious relations between Spain and Italy in the 16th century has to be in some way revised, and that this Catholic paradigm, so this holy alliance between Rome and Madrid, between the papacy and the Spanish crown to defend the Catholic faith, cannot and should not explain everything. Almost not at the first moment, I would feel. And the second hypothesis is that the history of skepticism and non-belief or unbelief, which played an integral role in the formulation of our present-day European consciousness, was affected in a very special way by this encounter between Italy and Spain, and their particular way of contesting religious constriction and belief. And I want to start focusing first in the particular cultural and religious climate of Spain between the 15th and 16th century, where the forced coexistence of three religions caused struggle and violence, but also a strange system of syncretic beliefs, a kind of intermingled arrangement between the two and three monotheism. This was true basically all along the 15th century, but it is particularly evident after the 1492, when in the Spanish society there were only new converts and no more Jewish. The Spanish archives are plenty of people who explain to the Inquisitor their personal view or belief, their explanation of the fact that three rival religions exist, everyone with its own prescription and laws, but everyone convinced of being the only true one. Many of them simply accepted that all the three religions were true, and anyone could be saved following the law in which he was born. And that's the topic of Stuart Scott's book, How Can We Save? that was often expressed in terms of three revelations and three prophets, but one equivalent truth. Like the converso of Saragossa, who explained to the Inquisitor that he believed in Christ, Moses, and Muhammad, but that menos tenía Mahoma que lo de los otros. Or the Morisca Granada Catalina de Quesada, who during the Inquisitorial trial explained that there is only one God and one law, and the difference between the three laws were due to the fact that God gave to Christian the law with his right hand and to Hebrew and Muslim with his left hand. And this fact caused difference only in the way of writing, so from right to left for Christian and from left to right for Muslim and Hebrew, but nothing more. Of course, there was also a much more materialistic counterpart. If we have three truths, three religion rivals, so maybe that nobody of them is true, and all religious prescription are lies, and all religion promises are lies. So that a relevant number of Spanish conversos chased and tried by the Inquisition with the charge of Judaism or Judaizer confessed that they did not believe in Christian neither Judaic religion, and that nothing exists after that. We found in a lot of trials that they believe that there is nothing more than live and die, or nothing more than to be born and by and like beasts. No hay sino nacer y vivir, or nacer y vivir como bestias. Scholars of Hebrew community used to refer to this complex of thinking, calling them popular Averroism. So it's an attitude that maybe it sank its root in rationalistic belief that grew around the Averroes commentaries on Aristotle, but all along the 15th century, this skeptical attitude became very common and popular and grew particularly in the community of conversos. So it was the comparison between different laws and different truths that lead to doubt. And that's a very particular thing and a very Spanish thing, I would say. The doubt that there might be nothing after death also made its appearance in Italy almost in the same year, but in a more subtle and indirect manner. The thesis of the immortality of the soul, as the converso Juan de Lucena reported on his return from Rome, was the subject of heated discussion among intellectuals, filling pages of scholarly discussion and scholastic debates. It did not circulate among the new converts who were confused and divided between the two laws, but amongst the commentators of Aristotle. The debate had arisen over Pomponazzi's De Immortalitate Anime, and the ban in Rome on addressing the issue of mortality had not stopped the debate. The matter had a long history, some aspects of which have been reconstructed, continuing underground in the second half of the 16th century, and sometimes animating the position of philosophers like Cremonini and even Giordano Bruno. But unlike the Spanish phenomenon, here Averroism declined as a philosophically clear and recognizable school doctrine, acquiring in particular the traits of a political view of religion and deriving a great deal from readings of Machiavelli. So religion is nothing more than a political instrument. You can decide to believe it, and it is worth to do so in countries like Italy and Spain, where Inquisition can pursue, but you know that is something fictional. So in my view, and what my actual project is trying to do is that research is still required in order to bring these two worlds closer together and to compare them. Thus we have the Spain of the conversos, that of the Marranos, and that of the intuitive, I would say, spontaneous Averroism of the ordinary people, of popular people, as well as the Italy of the scholastic discussion, of Pomponazzi, of Padua Aristotelianism. And in the background, remote in time, we have the France of the Skepticism philosopher and the dawn of libertinage erudite, and the great European tradition of doubt that develops in different assumptions. So just take your mind to these three different environments. And what my research is trying to do is to study the moment in which the Spanish and the Italian different religious skeptical tradition converge. So between, I would say, 1530s and 1550, a large number of Spanish refugees arrived in northern Italy. There were intellectuals charged with heresy by the Spanish Inquisition, Jewish or better conversos, in its way to the more tolerant cities of Italy, Venice, Ferrara, Ancona, or directed through the Sephardic route to Constantinople. There were physicians looking for a more open and tolerant place where to study and work. And we know, on the other side, that it's at that point, and possibly in the northern Italy, that this kind of very mysterious dialogue, the tribus impostoribus, appeared, presenting positions that seems almost Hispanic in the way they were formulated, and began to circulate secretly. It will have a long clandestine circulation and will play a fundamental role in the rising of deistic belief in the Europe of 17th century. And despite, we can say, were also the ideas of two quite known disciples of Juan de Valdez, Girolamo Busale and Giulio Basalu. Sorry, this is no, I must say vivir. I would say Girolamo Busale and Giulio Basalu, having passed from believing, and I quote, only what was consistent with either law, so Hebrew and Christian, to the conviction that religion was simply and I quote, l'invenzione di uomini al ben vivere. So that religion was no more than mere invention made by men in order to live properly. So Busale was a Spanish origin, and in particular he came from a converso family who was a fine scholar of Greek and Hebrew. He took part in the movement of the Spirituali, led by the Spanish refugee Juan de Valdez, then became an Anabaptist and led the Anabaptist movement in the north of Italy, and then finishes his day in Damascus as a tailor. And I think it's important to try to understand what are the point of contact between these two traditions. And now could the encounter of these two worlds, Spain far removed from the customary Black legends type of image, we have of 16th century Spain and Italy, and see how that particular environment can contribute, or may have contributed, to the construction of doubt in Europe. And saying that, I will try to give you a very partial answer to this problem through the story of an eccentric personality, Diego Hurtado de Mendoza. Humanist, books and codices collectors, but also Spanish ambassador in Italy, Diego Hurtado de Mendoza played a fundamental role in Italy and Europe. He consciously and provocatively recognized himself as a mediator, as a point of encounter of these two traditions, considering himself both Averroist, he was considering him an Averroist, and they took a great deal in discussing with the Padua and Averroists, and Marano. And we will see in which particular way Diego Hurtado de Mendoza is using this term, because I think it's pretty interesting. So not in an ethnical way, but in a kind of intellectual attitude. And he built on that part his particular vision of politics and how to face and solve the religious conflicts that were here in Europe. So Diego was born around 1502 to one of Spain's most illustrious families, de Mendoza. He was the youngest son of Inigo Lopez de Mendoza, Count of Tendilla, an ambassador, the father himself, a humanist, a hero of the War of Granada, and then the first Captain General of the Conqueror of Granada. His father imposed to the old inhabitants a series of agreements, the very famous capitulaciones, that mostly allowed the Muslims to keep their own religion and habits. The Granada of the Capitulaciones, that is a very short period in Granada history, the Granada of the Capitulaciones was remembered, and for Diego remains a kind of idyllic and a very idealistic place. He would often recall it in all along his life and works. It was a kind of basic point of reference for Diego Hurtado de Mendoza, who particularly enjoyed telling an anecdote that then became very popular in Italian circles when Ferdinand's officer, officiales, dispatched to watch over the activities of Talavera, the Archbishop of Granada, and Tendilla, his father, and broke the capitulation agreements imposing forced baptism and triggered the Muslim population first major revolt. His father made amends by seeking a personal agreement with the rebels and offering them his wife and children as hostages as a guarantee of his intention. So Diego was probably not yet born, and even if he had been, he probably would not have remembered the Nancy he had spent in the palace of a noble Moor from Albaicin. Not perhaps like his sister Maria, a very, very interesting character, had been enchanted by the magical art of the Moor. But in Italy, he enjoyed describing the episode with something like a taste for the exotic and the remote. And then there's something else that he is always insisted upon, amazing Italian intellectual with the extent of his culture, his knowledge of Arabic. And that was a point that was not very clear, but I think is particularly true. Maybe we will come back and we'll discuss that point. So the knowledge of Arabic was testified by Paolo Manuzzo and Ambrosio de Morales, but also on the notes Diego Hurtado de Mendoza took on Arabic codices, so that will show pretty well that he really knew and learned quite well Arabic. And around 1520, Diego visited Italy for the first time in various places, Padua, Bologna, and Siena. He had sporadically attended Italian university, and he was particularly interested in the study of Aristotelian rationalism and in the debates on Averroism and for his Aristotelian commentaries. He perhaps, not sure, he perhaps attended some lessons by Pomponazzi, but we know that he tried to get hold of all the great teachers' controversial and forbidden works, and they are obvious for that. In 1535, he was one of the followers of the emperor, accompanying him on the famous expedition to Tunis. Part of the group of the Spanish philosophers who dispute over Averroism with Moulay Hassan, the king of Tunis, and his courtiers. It was to him that this strong king led, among other things, some valued codices saved from the fire that broke out during the siege of Charles the Great. And Diego Hurtado de Mendoza talked about these codices as a gift. We can wonder if they were really a gift, but he had some of that codice. So he was appointed ambassador to Venice in 1539 with the ungrateful task of bringing closer to Spain a republic like the Venice Republic that was traditionally distant and always looking to France rather than to Spain in its alliance. The characters to play was that of culture and patronage. His house became a constant point of reference for Italian writers, humanists and artists, including Aretino, Bembo, Giovio, Titian, Sansovino, Beccadelli, and the Florentine protonotary Pietro Carnesecchi, who was the Duke of Florence, Cosimo de' Medici's right-hand man in Florence, and was condemned to death for heresy in 1567. There were also some more obscure characters who orbited around that uncertain boundaries between orthodoxy and heresy. During his year in Italy, Diego de Mendoza was the dedicatee of really numerous works that the Inquisition, the Roman Inquisition, was later branded as being heretical and included in the Italian and Spanish indexes of literature. His politics in Italy was a very special and particular one. Firmly convinced that Charles V needed to find an agreement with Lutherans, he was the major representative of an anti-Roman and anti-curial policy in Italy. Mendoza and his entourage in no way evaded contacts or meetings with the Reformation world. Quite the contrary, they appear to present themselves at that strategic moment. We are at the beginning of the 40s, of 1540s, as one of the most important and most authoritative point of contact. Later on, during his trial for heresy, Pietro Carnesecchi, this is the very famous portrait of Diego de Mendoza by Tiziano. Pietro Carnesecchi recalled that exciting work team with the ideas and heresy, and he talked about, for example, a Flemish man of letters, possibly Conrad Gesner, the author of the Bibliotheca Universalis, whose ideas, according to Carnesecchi, smacked of heresy. Carnesecchi was talking also of Alfonso de Ulloa, Diego's private secretary, a free spirit who was tried by the Inquisition in 1558, or of Diego de Encinas, the author of a famous letter to Luther, who was burned in Rome in 1558, and of a certain Ramirez, whose position Carnesecchi found it hard to explain to the Inquisitor. And he was saying, I quote, più presto apio che altrimenti, come quello che aveva partecipazione di Marrano per nazione e di Luterano per conversazione. So more an atheist than anything else, like a man who participated as a Marrano considering his nationality and as a Lutheran considering his conversation. In those years, the Spanish ambassadors alone became the center of culture, open northwards to Protestant and eastwards, ready to welcome Greek scholars and pressure codices from Greece and Constantinople. There were Protestant Hellenists working in Mendoza Library, which according to Gesner was one of the 5 largest in Italy, including the Vatican and the Martian Library in Venice. And the rediscovery of Greek philosophy and the return to general circulation of forgotten codices was perhaps the greatest cultural operation launched by Mendoza in those years. And I think 2 examples will suffice to give you an idea of the importance of culture practiced by Mendoza. The first is the rediscovery of Photius and of his fabulous catalogue of Greek works, and the acquisition of Sextus Empiricus Codex of the outline of Pyrrhonism and of the Adversus Mathematicus, which Juan Paez de Castro, the secretary of Mendoza and a well-known humanist, began to translate into Latin in 1545. So Mendoza's edition never actually saw the light of day, but this codex may have been used for, he finished the Latin, Paez de Castro finished the Latin translation, but it was never published. And this codex may have been used for the publication of the French edition of 1562, the first edition of the Sextus Empiricus, which formed the basis of the rebirth of Pyrrhonism in France. And it was the edition then inspired the essay of Montaigne, and from whom Montaigne took to write a series of his library. And we use Montaigne think about this edition as a weapon in the battle to overcome the laceration of the wars of religion and other conflicts. So the discovery of Sextus Empiricus went hand in hand with this long-standing passion for Averroism. During his years as a Venetian ambassador, Mendoza maintained close ties with the works of the Italian Averroism and with the Padua scholars. He invited them to his Venice palace. He started a Castilian translation of Aristotle's Mechanics and prepared his paraphrasy to Theos Aristoteles. And while summoned to Trent during the second phase of the council as the representative of the emperor, first spent 2 months in Padua, the cradle of Aristotelian rationalism, gathering material to take to Trent. In Trent, he put his rich library at the disposal of the Father of the Council and set up an Aristotelian academy, so during the Council of Trent, gathering together numerous humanist and experienced Greek scholars. Mendoza's political letters from Trent tell of the Council's exhaustingly slow discussion and of his impatience with the friars. He's always complaining about friars and their theological activities, which were the cause, in his view, of the failure to reach any agreement with the Lutherans. And he repeatedly proclaimed himself as an Averroist, quite an astonishing fact, considering the fact he was acting as the emperor representative in the most important ecclesiastical council of the modern age. In his way of thinking, and I quote the letter, he wrote to the court to defend himself against the first accusation coming up against him. Supporting Averroism was a close way of escaping from the friar Thomistic rigidity and also from a world that was too closely tied to the authority of the Pope and of the Rome. He was a voracious reader of Machiavelli, and Averroism must have represented for him not so much a strict philosophical system, as well as the key of access to a political religion, far the opposite to what Machiavelli would call the Republic of Cloak Wearers, La Repubblica degli Isocorrenti. So more closely tied to doubt than to counter-reformation self. So the widely proclaimed Averroism became appropriate in a real and actual political position during the period of his embassy in Ukraine. And not only an Averroist proclaimed himself, but also Marlano. And both terms had for him the same significance, that of a skeptical, of an unbeliever. Basically, a person who believed that religious conflict had to be faced in an instrumental and political way. I don't know if I have a few more. Yeah, right? I wish to highlight one final point that maybe is making us more closer to this very eccentric character. The outstanding feature of the letter of the period is Mendoza's overwhelming passion for a Jewish lady of Venice, possibly a passion that he decided to transform in a sort of literary amusement, displaying a touch of irony and a strong sense of irreverence. So a common purpose in the Spanish anti-Jewish medieval arsenal, that of a man loved for a Jewess who centrally totally overcome the rationality of the Christian man, and especially that of the Christian government, is appropriated by Mendoza and used to attract attention, to amaze, possibly to scandalize, and to mark once more the distance separating him from a certain type of Spanish world. In his letter, he wrote that this passion had overwhelmed him to the point that he had contemplated circumcision, he had quarreled and then made up with his Jewish lover, Simultaneous delay. He had continued to visit the Juderia, the ghetto, and had happily celebrated 2 Easter with her. So, unas tras otra, que mi judía la hace en Viernes Santo y yo en Domingo. The whole account proceeds with obscene double entendre, anti-clerical attacks, and ironic remarks on the much discussed converso origin of the Mendoza family. The story and the literary game must have been public knowledge in the ambassador circle, when called into question by Mendoza in a literary game, Aretino wrote a sonnet about the relationship between Mendoza and the Jewess, taking for granted his conversion to the ceremonies of the goddess. And by the way, there's another interesting. Mendoza asked Titian to make a portrait of the Jewess, of the courtesan. And it should be very similar to the very discussed and famous Venus of Urbino. And if the discussion about the meaning and the purpose of the Venus of Urbino is still open, we know for sure that Mendoza kept the portrait covered with a veil in front of his bed, unveiling it in the right occasion. So it was a kind of sort of pornographic help to his erotic performance. In later years, during the Siena's War, when Mendoza's time of glory was over, Italian pasquinades constantly projected the image of him as a marrano, an arch-marrano, a faithless non-believer. And the pasquinas played on his physiognomy, calling him a white Moor, un moro bianco, and an uncircumcised Jew. In some way, and at more conscious level, Carnesecchi logical reading seemed to be once again applicable. So more an atheist than anything else, like a man who participated as a Marrano considering his nationality, and as a Lutheran considering his conversation. And Marrano at that point in Italy was synonymous of unbeliever. There was a joke about the Spaniards, and their myth's origin, and their tendency to not believe in any God. It was what the Italian called, ironically, the pecadillo de España, the little Spanish sin. And I quote from Animal Caro, but I found many other places in which this idea of pecadillo came out, dialogue of 1838. E parmi che abbia fatto come quello spagnolo che quando si fu confessato di tutti i suoi peccati ritornò al confessore a dire che si era dimenticato di uno peccadillo, e questo era di non credere a Dio. So Mendoza decided to play also with the prejudice of the Italians, with the equivalence of Spaniard, Marranos, and unbeliever. He mocked the prejudice of the Italian, glorying in his Marrano image and exploiting his Spanish origins and all its implications. And the case of Averroism, as in the case of Averroism, being a Marrano, proclaiming himself a Marrano, became a way of thinking, a way of behaving, and reflects a particular political position in which the dialogue with the Protestant, distance from Rome, from the Pope, and from the conservative wing of Spanish Catholicism were an essential part. And we continue to exploit this image, reconstructing in an overall picture where it was part of a personal history and an attitude of mind, reflecting once again